Kavitha and Jessica, I am so pleased to have you with us today. I'm such a big fan of both of your work, and collectively, I am a huge fan of this book, and I really think everybody should read it. So uh, let's dive right in because I was actually very curious to learn that you two, before this book project came up, had actually never met in person. Is that true, Kavitha?
Yeah, Jessica and I met on Twitter, and whenever we tell people this, we say Twitter is actually good for something in that respect.
Right?
It brought us together. It can bring communities of marginalized fans and people together, and certainly women sports writers and women sports fans are part of that. But yeah, Jessica and I we struck up a friendship. We like greatly admired each other's work. We had, common points of coverage as well, especially with Jessica's incredible work on gendered violence. And, we started talking about this kind of book idea. We struck our book deal before we had ever actually met in person. And I believe it was after we signed the book deal. Jessica came to New York and we had dinner at Pappardella with Emma Spann on the Upper West Side. And then I went to Austin a couple of times for South by Southwest. I met Jessica there, and then she came back to do her book tour for her first book. And I think that's it. Like, we've met in person 4 times, but I feel like I've known her my whole life.
Well, I feel like there's this army of, sort of like-minded individuals, in particular women in this business, who I feel very supported by. So I get that. So, I mean, I guess your collaboration could have gone in any number of ways. Jessica, why was this the book that you chose to write?
Oh, that's a great question. How did the friendship end up in this? I think, it started sort of on a lark. We were annoyed and frustrated. We think it was around the Super Bowl. Book writing is a long time, so it's hard to remember the beginnings, but we think it was around the Super Bowl when you get those kind of, well, not kind of, the condescending articles written towards women, assuming that they're not fans of football and that they'll have to suffer through some kind of Super Bowl party. But I think it makes a lot of sense that there are two of us on this. Every chapter in this book is a different theme within sports that a conscientious sports fan probably will struggle with at some point as a fan. And it's not the kind of book that I could have written by myself. It's very expansive. It's very broad. And I think having both of us contribute really makes the book so much stronger and just makes it hits in different ways because there were two of us working on it.
When you work in sports, I think you're confronted with these conflicts on a regular basis. But for you guys in your sort of individual journeys, Kavitha, when did you start to recognize that sometimes sports do not love you back?
Um, I think it's not even just when you work in sports. I think just when you're a woman in this space, right? I mean, all
Mhm.
of us just being fans have that experience of being at the sports bar and, a dude finds out you like really love sports or you're watching a game really intently and then you get the test, right? Every woman has gotten the test. There's some kind of, who was the 1987 AL batting title winner and that kind of thing. So yeah, I think just again, just being a woman in this space really you're really confronted with the fact that you're not supposed to be in this space, or that the
Mhm.
space isn't built for you. It's not geared towards you. It takes so much more effort to exist in this space as fans, let alone as professional sports writers. So, all kinds of things there. And then for me, especially on top of being a woman in this space, I'm the daughter of immigrants. My parents didn't grow up with American sports. I don't have that sports origin story of like dad taking me to the ballpark. It's actually quite the reverse. Um, so, all of that kind of comes together to make you feel like these things that you love so much aren't necessarily supposed to be for you, but at the end of the day, they should be for all of us.
At what point, I mean, how early are maybe girls in particular getting cues that they don't belong in this sports space?
Well, that's a really good question. I think it starts really early, and again, it's not something. I don't think it starts in a way that's particularly targeted or
Mhm.
there's something overt about it. It's just, you're always looked at as the unicorn in the room when you're the girl who's watching baseball, or like I was the girl who was always taking score during a baseball game, right?
Mhm.
Mhm.
The unicorn aspect of it, the fact that like even if it's not necessarily you're not supposed to be here or it's not a negative thing, it's just weird that you exist here, right? And I think that starts really early.
Yeah. Can I just
Sorry.
add, like, so the United Nations has actually done work on this. This is important, like that they recognize that getting girls into sport is something that can be life-changing. Like it's that important, but it's also that difficult in a lot of places around the world. I did want to just mention, I wrote a piece a few years ago about girls who play baseball. Let's talk about unicorns. Baseball as an institution has tried very hard to funnel girls into softball, and there just aren't many opportunities for girls who play baseball. And I was interviewing this 10-year-old maybe, and she said this thing, it's in the article that I wrote for Bleacher Report, but she says this, it made me sad to hear it out of her mouth, this thing about, well, when they try to force me into softball, I'm going to say no. Like that was the idea. And I was thinking, wow, she already understands at 10 that this is going to be part of her participation in baseball, is like trying to push away the people pushing her into softball. And I would just remember feeling so sad that she already was aware of it. So I think it hits pretty early, if I had to guess. I think even talking about merchandising, if little girls can't access the same kind of stuff that they expect, that they see boy athletes getting, I think they get that messaging pretty well.
Well, and you talk about it very specifically in a number of chapters, but I guess in particular, the chapter on the WNBA, and you talk about how hard it is to even find a game. I mean, there are so many detractors who say, well, there's no interest in women's sports, but like, if you can't find the game and you don't know where it is, how can you grow that fan base?
Right.
Correct?
That speaks to, what we were talking about earlier about just how much work you have to do as a women's sports fan to exist in the space. It's double the amount of work if you're a fan of women's sports, right? You have to search out the programming schedule. You have to figure out what channel, when they're not on ESPN or ESPN2, you have to figure out what channel they're on. It's so hard to find stats on the WNBA. This is like a major point of contention among at WNBA media, is that just the collection of stats. I will tell you that, I run a podcast right now, and just finding old game clips to use sound from the WNBA is an impossible feat. So all of these things come together to make it really difficult for us to be not just women's sports fans, but fans of women's sports. We are starting to see that change, which is really positive. We're seeing the WNBA playoffs on major broadcasting networks and in prime time, and not at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday.
I'm wondering if you have volume 2 written or at least kind of assembled somewhat, because there has been so much. I don't know when you finished this book, but it was before the pandemic started, and I guess before this incredible shift has happened. Do you have kind of an idea of where you're going to go for the next round? Because it's been an incredible time on sort of both sides. Jessica?
Yeah, so we remember exactly when we finished writing the book. We talked about this pure panic moment when the NBA shut down, because the book was going to print the next week, and we were told that we were not allowed to add anything at that point. And so the final stuff we wrote in the book, there's 2 paragraphs about COVID in the introduction, because we were like, we don't know what will be happening on September 1st when the book comes out. So yeah, it's been a huge change. Like we have the chapter on Native mascots, which kind of ends with like, Washington NFL team will never change their name. And that was obviously changed over the course of the summer. And yeah, everything around athlete activism and just politics in sports and sports in politics is like a whole other level than I think we could have imagined at the point when the book went to print, including like here in the United States. It's part of the presidential election right now. Like college football is playing a deep role in that. So I don't know, volume 2, I can't imagine doing it again. I mean, one of the things we tried to do with the book is like tackle these systemic issues that we think are long, they took a long time to get here. They'll take a long time to change. So we hope that the book has that kind of staying power.
I assure you, and I assure the audience that it 100% does. No, there's nothing at all out of date, but it is an ever-changing world. And part of what you did say in that introduction is that you were worried that fans were going to be so eager for a return to play that they might actually start to overlook some of the problematic aspects. Have you seen that? Or I don't know, what's your sort of assessment of the fans? What kind of memory do we have?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I don't think I understood in March sort of how much stuff was going to be laid bare by the pandemic all of these systemic inequalities that we are addressing in this book seem more stark, even now, as we've seen all the types of inequalities come to the fore, especially everything around racial injustice in the US. And so what are people going to hold on to? Like, it's hard to imagine going backwards from the Wildcat strikes, like watching all of these athletes show that they have power, that these are issues that they care about, that they're demanding more of the society in which that they entertain all the time. Can we go back from any of that? I'm not sure. I do want to say, I think most sports stuff that makes a lot of money, it's a big machine and it churns really well.
Well, I think it's a super understandable thing for fans to want sports as a distraction right now. There's so much terrible things going on in the world, and sports are fun. And, you know, they remind us of our communities and our identities, and we write a lot about that. So I don't think that, you know, fans should beat themselves up over that desire. But at the same time, like Jessica said, you know, the pandemic has laid bare all of these issues. They've stripped down all of the other, you know, kind of window dressings around them and just made them, like, distilled them down to their purest forms. And this was a big concern, whether or not the return to play would distract from the calls for racial justice. When the NBA was restarting its bubble, there was a whole faction led by Kyrie Irving that said, you know, maybe we don't actually want to enter the bubble because we want to continue this good work that we're doing.
Right.
And you haven't actually seen, despite the fact that we've had a return to play, you have absolutely not seen that momentum slow down.
There are people who don't want sports and politics to intersect. You talk a lot about that. But sort of on a maybe different level, some people do just want the distraction of it. I think once you open yourself up to kind of looking at some of these issues, you can go down a rabbit hole. So how do you reconcile? Like, how do you love sports when sports don't love you back? And I mean, I know you can only speak from your personal experiences, but I think that would help people, because once you start to look for the cracks, there are lots of cracks.
Yeah. I think sometimes you stop loving sports. That's sort of the extreme version, which I've done. I used to be a huge college football fan, as we talked about before, and I actually don't watch it at all. I actually was in a conversation yesterday where I had no clue who was ranked and who had played games. I was ignorant of everything around that sport. But that's a personal line that I drew for lots of different reasons. I don't know. I'm wearing my Serena Williams shirt. She's my favorite athlete in my favorite sport. And we have a whole chapter in the book on issues within tennis. She, you know, personifies so many of them, or the way people respond to her are really the issues within tennis. But I don't know. I think sometimes you just have to sit with the uncomfortable. I think we're really not, as a society, we don't like gray areas. We don't like to exist in that space. We want the black and the white. And that's just, there's nothing in this book that's like that. And I think part of it is just being okay with being uncomfortable. And I think we do that a lot in a lot of pop culture that we consume. We're pretty used to problematic people popping up in all sorts of ways, systems that are bad, and us just kind of shrugging it off. I think a lot of us have that skill already. You can apply that to sports. But my joke is that, like, when I watch tennis, I feel like a 3-year-old. I'm just like, la, 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 la. Like, I can't, I don't want to hear it. I don't want to know anymore. I just want to be able to watch the game and enjoy it as a fan. So I feel all of that. I feel that tension. And I don't think that there's necessarily a good single answer for how you deal with it.
Kavitha, what about fans? Because I think, you know, you talk about athletes understanding how much power they have. Fans have power too.
Fans absolutely do have power. So much of this book is about athletes and about the labor and recognizing that these people are workers and what we as fans can do to better recognize that. But a lot of this book is also just us as fans realizing that sometimes we're given the shaft by our teams. There's a whole chapter in here about loving your team when you hate your owner. And there are so many reasons why you can hate your owner. But it all kind of comes down to the fact that these people are still making money off of us, and they should be held accountable to us in certain ways. They should represent all of our interests. They should represent all of our communities, and they should be pressured. They should feel pressured to have to cater to all of us and not just a certain subsect of our population. So, I mean, absolutely, fans do have power here. And then the other chapter that I'll point to, I'm constantly telling people, even if you are not a sports fan, if you are a taxpayer, sports touch your lives, sports affect you in some way. There's a whole chapter in here about stadium subsidies. And really what that chapter is about, if you strip down all the sports stuff, is about corporate welfare and about the way that the tax code is built and the way that our economy is geared toward propping up billionaires and billion-dollar businesses on the backs of everyday taxpayers. So we absolutely do have a lot more power than I think we realize as fans. But then the tension also comes to which fans have more power, which fans are being catered to the most.
Can you elaborate on that?
Sure. I mean, I think that for generations, right? White men were the sports fan. They were the only sports fan. And, you obviously still see media and media representation and the way that stories are framed, who gets covered, how they get covered, and who's doing the covering, geared toward that one singular idea of the white male sports fan. And obviously that doesn't include all of us. And there is frankly just money left on the table when you are ignoring the fact that there are all kinds of other groups of sports fans that have not traditionally been in the purview or what you think of as a sports fan. And we make this argument throughout the book. We make the economic argument when it comes to women's sports fans. We also just make the media representation argument as well. There's a whole chapter about who is telling these stories and with the voices of really diverse people in the industry. And that matters, and that is starting to change, but that only changes. The diverse sports fan is only going to be catered to when the people making the decisions recognize the value in that and also start hiring people at the top who can make those high level decisions, who represent the fan. And like, that's the only time I'll ever say trickle down, because that does actually end up trickling down from high level decision making to catering to us as sports fans.
That was chapter 7. I appreciated that honestly, I went through this book and every chapter I was like, oh God, yes, I understand. So really an unbelievable read. Unbelievable. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to leave you both with a question that we ask all of our guests, but maybe I'm going to frame it slightly differently. I always ask people what their best advice to their young selves would be. But I guess I may put it kind of more in the context of a young sports fan that is you. So Jessica, I'll start with you.
Oh my, this is hard. What would I tell myself as a young sports fan? The sports are going to get better and better. Like, stick with it. It's great. I will say my advice to my younger self, if I had to just give it in general, is be okay with wandering. Like, my career has not been a straight path in any way. The fact that I'm sitting here talking to you about sports in a book I wrote, I wouldn't have even imagined that 10 years ago. So that's my big piece of advice, is being okay with wandering.
I am with you. Kavitha.
I think I would tell my younger my younger self, just, you belong here, even if you don't feel like you always do. So much of my sports fandom has been about feeling connected to my communities and things like that when I don't necessarily have. But just that, this space is supposed to be for all of us, and you do belong here, even though it's hard. But like Jessica said, it does get better. And the second thing I'll say is to my younger self is, stop chasing the white whale of popularity. Stop trying to be like mainstream accepted. And I think Sarah Spain has said this before. She said it very well. Stop trying to, you don't need to always be the cool girl in the room, right? You love sports because you love sports, and it's not about whether, it's a good pickup line at a bar, or whether, it'll make men more accepting of you. But it's something that you have a right to love and participate in.
Well, both of you help me love sports more. I'm not joking. Thank you so much for this. I so appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.